Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Jay Cortez. I'm from the Home Program at HCD. Thank you for being right on time for our 1:30 webinar. That said, we are going to wait about 5 minutes and only 5 minutes for others to be able to join so that they can experience the whole webinar along with you. So thank you for your patience, and I'll give a few updates along the way just to advise everybody as to what's going on. I'll also put something into the webinar chat to say the same thing. Once again, welcome to the Home 2024 NOFA application webinar for multifamily rental projects. We are going to wait until 1:35 just to make sure everybody can get here. So thank you for standing by. It's now 1:34, and in exactly 1 minute, we'll be getting started. Thank you for your patience. Okay, it's 1:35. It's time to start. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nikki McKay. And Nikki, we can't hear you if your mic might be muted. I'll tell you when we hear you.
Okay, I
There-
figured it out.
Okay.
There's way too many buttons to push to use phone audio, and sometimes I miss one. Thank you, everybody, and welcome. 60, it looks like we're heading up, we're climbing the ladder above 50 attendees. We're up to 61. Welcome to the Home 2024 NOFA application webinar for our multifamily rental projects. My name is Nicolay McKay. I've been with the Department of Housing and Community Development for 18 years. Most of my 18 years have been in the home program. I've taken a few detours along the way and done some other fun things, but my heart has always belonged in home. I'd like to introduce you to our very, very competent team of representatives and specialists that we have working in our home program. We have Francesca Wander, JT Marcel, Chris Janello, Soledad Sandoval, and Stephanie Booth. And then our supporting retired annuitants are Albert Rowland and Robert Rystad. He goes by Bob Rystad, and you probably are familiar with Albert's name and Robert's name because they have been with HCD for as long as I can remember, and they came before I did. Next slide. So for consistency and transparency, we want everyone to submit questions to the Home NOFA email inbox outside of this particular webinar. For this webinar, we will be answering questions live during the question and answer period, and we would ask that you please submit your questions through the Q&A portal of this Zoom meeting. And we have put on the slide our Home NOFA email inbox address, just in case you need to jot it down. The slide deck and the recording of this workshop will also be posted on the HCD website shortly after this, a few days after this meeting. Next slide. So the chat is disabled for participants. So we want all your questions in the Q&A. We will be addressing them live as best we can. We'll be taking at least one break about midway through this presentation. Next slide. And right into the presentation we go. So our NOFA deadlines are not what is, well, I guess maybe we have our revised NOFA up now, but our original NOFA application deadlines for this NOFA were pushed out to May of 2024, May 24th, 2024, in order to accommodate anybody that was impacted by the LA fires and being able to get their work completed and make sure that everyone had the same opportunity and a sufficient amount of time to submit their applications. We will be posting a revised NOFA that has this new May 24th, 2025 application deadline. So you're hearing it first here in this webinar. Next slide. So some of the things that we're going to be talking about today, we're going to do a NOFA overview and a what's new and a little conversation about some things that we've noticed through our scoring and rating and ranking that we want to bring to your attention. We're going to talk a little bit about the eCivis application portal. Not much because I am not the expert there. The funding availability and the application limits. We'll go through the threshold requirements, scoring and ranking project feasibility that includes financial feasibility, NEPA, and relocation. Next slide. So our eCivis application portal, the link is on our HCD website. In addition to the link that is in this slide, there is also a link to a user manual and a webinar on how to set up your solicitations. Next slide. So what kind of funding do we have available this year? In very round numbers, it's a lot less than last year. As you know, last year we released a NOFA for about approximately $120 million, which we will be awarding in the next couple of months. But this year's allocation from HUD is only $35 million. 55% of that will be for rental projects. 5% will be for first-time homebuyer projects, and 40% will be for program activities. We need to remind you that we have a requirement that 50% of our allocation go to rural areas, and 15% of our allocation must be awarded to CHODOs. We also have a 20% Native American entities target included in this NOFA. Their NOFA application portal is an over-the-counter process. And if at the end of the over-the-counter process, all of the Native American targeted funds are not utilized, we will utilize them to fund either programs or projects or both. Next slide. I'm not really sure this is in round numbers. I think
that's supposed to say for project activities, not program. That's a typo, sorry.
Okay, okay. Can we just skip this slide because I don't know how to talk about it? Okay. So, things that are new and different. As you recall, last year, our application limits were $12 million for rental projects, $3 million for first-time homebuyer projects. This year, due to the funding reduction, we've reduced the amount of funding for a rental project to $4.5 million and first-time homebuyer to $2 million. So that we can fund more than one or two projects. We want to be able to spread our home dollars as far as they can go and still provide a reasonable amount of funding for a project. The maximum state recipient general administration was $150,000 last year, and project-related soft costs were $50,000. This year, our general admin for state recipients is $50,000, and project-related soft costs for state recipients are $50,000. Developers are not eligible, nor are CHODOs eligible for admin or project-related soft costs. Next slide. The scoring factors were found in the NOFA last year, but in this year, we've created a separate scoring factors appendix. It's called the NOFA Appendix D. That's where you will find all the details about scoring factors that we'll be going over in today's webinar. And the CHODO operating funds, the maximum was $200,000 last year's NOFA. This year it's $75,000. Again, a lot of these reductions are as a result, a direct result of the decrease in home funding. Prior NOFA years were giving us around $40 million, and we're experiencing some decreasing in allocations. And so we're trying to gently nudge and adjust and still be responsive to what our partners need as best we can. Next slide. So this is a monitoring fees for rental projects. As you know, there's a 3% accelerator on monitoring fees once a project is placed in service. So last year, fees were on the left. This year's fees going forward will be on the right. and we've just applied a 3% accelerator to those categories. Next slide. Some important reminders. If you are a state recipient and you are applying as a city, your mayor must sign all written contracts. That includes the standard agreement and any other documents have to be executed with the mayor's signature. However, I want to caution everyone that the mayor's signature cannot appear on your resolution if they are the authorized or designated signer. There is an ordinance that will allow the mayor not to be the signer, but that ordinance has to be in place and in effect, and we need a copy of it with your resolution if someone else is going to sign other than the mayor. If you have specific questions about this, you can give us a call. Any of the reps on the training today can reach out and help you individually. You can submit an inquiry through the Home NOFA inbox, or you can reach out to me directly. We do have templates that are designed with instructions that should help both cities, counties, and developers navigate some of the changes that have come up with our resolutions over the past year or so. Next slide. So our eligible applicants for our multifamily rental housing are state recipients, local agencies, cities and counties, and Native American entities. Next slide. Your eligible state recipients. To be a state recipient, you must not be designated as a home participating jurisdiction by HUD. That means you don't get your money directly from HUD. You are not participating in an urban county agreement. You are not participating in a home consortium. Your project or program activities to be located within your defined service area. That would be within your city boundaries or the county boundaries that are unincorporated. And your jurisdiction's name will appear on a list in Appendix A of the current NOFA as designating you eligible to apply. Next slide. CHODO, a community housing designated organization. They can participate as an owner, developer, or sponsor. Our CHODO applicants must meet all the requirements found at 24 CFR 92.2 in the CHODO definition. Your CHODO must be certified for the project that you're applying for prior to award. So you will be submitting your CHODO certification documents with your application. Next slide. To meet the definition of an eligible, you're popping around on me, Jay. Can you go back?
Nikki, I skipped that because we accidentally duplicated a slide. Sorry about that.
Oh, you duplicated it. Well, thank you. Okay. So all projects must be located in areas listed in the Appendix A. So the city or the county's unincorporated area must be a state home eligible area for provide housing. State recipients, CHODOs, and developers can all apply for multifamily rental new construction, multifamily rental rehabilitation with or without acquisition, multifamily rental acquisition only projects. Those are acquiring rental projects that meet our property standards. And state recipients and CHODOs can apply for first-time home buyer projects. And that webinar will be next Tuesday. Next slide. So the combinations of activities haven't changed over the years too much. State recipients, excluding developers and CHOTOs, may apply for one rental project and one first-time homebuyer project, or they can have one rental project and any combination of eligible program activities, or they can do one first-time homebuyer project and any combination of program activities, except for if they have a first-time homebuyer project, they cannot run a first-time homebuyer program at the same time. Next page, or next slide.
Nikki, let me jump in here because we discovered something, which is Choto number 2 there. It says one rental first-time homebuyer project, and it should just say rental project. So just wanted to give you a heads up about an error we just did find before the meeting.
Thank you, Jay. So on this slide, please make a note that a CHOTO may apply for one rental, multifamily rental project and one first-time homebuyer project, or one first-time homebuyer project and the first-time homebuyer activity of infill new construction. Is that correct, Jay?
Yeah, it really should be one rental or first-time homebuyer project under number 2, plus one program activity. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Developers who are applying directly to the department may submit only one eligible activity. They can submit an application for a rental rehabilitation with or without acquisition, or they can submit a rental new construction project with or without acquisition. But they are limited to only one application per developer. We are trying to encourage our developers to partner with our state recipients. If a developer wants to partner with a state recipient, the state recipient is the applicant, and the developer may then undertake more than one project, but the application will be in the state recipient's name, not the developer's name. Next slide. So let's go over these limits again. Rental project limits are 4.5 million. That is the amount of, up to the amount of your loan that you can get based on your per unit subsidy, which is related to the number of home assisted units in your project. And then your, for state recipients or CHOTOs, your admin is added on top of that. But your soft costs or activity delivery amount is deducted from the amount of the loan that goes to the developer because it's included in the per unit subsidy. So if just to make this easy, if you had, and I'm going to use really big numbers so that it's easy to understand, if the maximum loan amount to the developer based on the number of units that you're creating is $4,500,000, but the city wants their activity delivery soft cost, and that is $500,000 of that, the loan to the developer would be $4 million. Soft cost would be $500,000, and then the admin would be added on top. So let's say they want another $100,000 in admin. So a state recipient's ask would be $4,600,000. So the developer would get $4 million, and the state recipient would get $600,000. We always add those on top of. In program activities, they are included in the max. So it's a little bit different in projects. So if you have some difficulty trying to figure out if you're working with a state recipient, let us know and we will help you back into the numbers that would be your maximum loan amount. This maximum goes for rental new construction projects, rental with or without, rental rehab with or without acquisition, and rental acquisition only. And so state recipients, be cautious because those activity delivery amounts are maximums. And if you don't need that much in soft costs, give it to your developer to help him pay for the production of the units. First-time homebuyer project limit is $2 million. Next slide. So for state recipients, the maximum you can request for general admin is $50,000, and the maximum you can request for project-related soft costs is $50,000. Again, if you feel like you are not going to need the maximum in project-related soft costs as a state recipient, you can request less, which then allows the developer to get a little bit more to help cover the cost of those units. For CHODOs, your CHODO operating funds is $75,000. Just a reminder that CHODO ops are limited to drawing $50,000 per year over a 3-year expenditure period. Next slide. Okay, it looks like we're ready for some questions, and it looks like there are some questions. Do you want me to read them and answer them?
That's what I want. Yes.
Okay, so the first question is from Darcy. Can we apply just for tenant-based rental assistance? It's not clear which parts of home we can apply for bundled and or individually. I realize this webinar is just about rental projects. Yes, Darcy, you can submit a program application. It's a different solicitation than your rental solicitations. And you should be able to find in the very near future a webinar that we recorded last week for program activities, and that will guide you through the rules and how to complete your applications. But that recording is being prepared to post on the HCD website. Darcy asked a second question, and he's asking, will the NOFA have additional changes other than the due date? Not to my knowledge. The only changes in the revised and restated NOFA is going to be the extension of the application. Barbara Mitchell has asked a question. Do the per unit application subsidies include all funding sources? If we use home ARP funding for the same project, are we still limited to the $181,488 for a studio when you're combining funding? The answer to this question is each program has their own per unit subsidy. So if you are going to combine home ARP and home together to assist the same unit, you can apply for $181,488,000 for a home ARP, and whatever the per unit subsidy lays, I'm going to just use $150,000 from home for the number of home assisted units, and you can layer that funding. So the 150 plus the 181 can be used for the creation of those home and home ARP assisted units. The question Barbara's asking, the next question, if we are already paying for a monitoring fee for home ARP funding, for the same project. Do we have to pay another fee for monitoring for home funding? Currently, the monitoring fee being charged is by program. That may change in the future, but currently you would be set up to pay 2 different monitoring fees. We are working on home guidelines that we hope to release next year that will address how monitoring fees are charged when we have multiple funding sources in a single project. But for now, with this NOFA, you have to calculate the monitoring fee in for the home assisted units. Isaac has asked the question, are CHOTOs eligible applicants for this element of the home NOFA? Not sure what this element of the home NOFA is, but multifamily rental housing, yes, CHOTOs are eligible. First-time home buyer projects, yes, CHOTOs are eligible. Acquisition and rehabilitation or acquisition only, yes, CHOTOs are eligible. Barbara Mitchell has asked, can a developer be a nonprofit that is not a CHOTO? The answer is absolutely yes. Let's see, I'm running out of room here. Okay, this is a question. How soon does the department anticipate announcing awards from the previous NOFA? So we can determine if a project needs to be submitted again for this round. We are targeting to hopefully have all awards made, or most all of the awards made, by the end of March or the middle of April. We'll have some stragglers that don't require tax credits that will probably go in a third round to ILC, but that will be ahead of the application deadline for this NOFA. I will take this moment to let everybody know that we are in the process of compiling a final point score list and posting it on our HCD website. It should be posted no later than next Friday. It'll probably be up a little bit sooner than that. So applicants from the 2022-2023 NOFA can see where they rank. And I think our cutoff is going to be right around 1310, 13.8 for fundable applications based on the amount of funding we have available. Clean this out just a little bit. Last year, the webinar wasn't posted for months after the webinar. Are you anticipating a significant delay? We are not anticipating a significant delay for this webinar to be posted. Have you posted last round's award list? The last award list we posted were for the 2021 NOFA. How is, and Becky Flores is asking, how is the number of home assisted units calculated for multifamily new construction projects? So you have to figure out how many units you want to build, how many bedrooms there are in each unit, and then you'll use our home per unit subsidy chart and multiply it by the number of units, and that will give you the amount of home dollars we can assist with. It's kind of a balancing act, Becky, and it's kind of a dance that you do, especially if you're going to use multiple funding sources. And it's definitely something that you have to keep in mind with. You may not be able to use home for all of your development costs, definitely not at 4.5 million. So you're going to have to pull in other funding sources. And depending on what the rules are for those funding sources, that's how you're going to build and put together your project. But you figure out how much money home can assist with by determining what the per unit subsidy is for the number of units that you are going to build. And then you kind of back into your request. Alex is asking, this is my first time learning about home. Can you elaborate on what programs are? Programs, how do I say this so that it's easy? Programs are funding that we provide to state recipients only. So individual developers and CHOTOs generally cannot apply for a program. And they provide funding either for somebody to buy their first home, down payment assistance, someone who owns their home and wants to do some sorely needed rehabilitation, fix codes or health and safety issues with their housing, or they can run a tenant-based rental assistance program. If you're interested in learning about programs, watch our website and check out our webinar on program activities. And Eugene, I have an 8-unit multifamily project in the works in North San Diego County with a density bonus where one affordable unit will be provided as part of the density bonus agreement. I don't know if you would be eligible. No, you will not be eligible for home funding for a single affordable unit. You must apply for at least and provide at least 5 units of home assisted housing in order to apply for our home dollars. I think I've exhausted the questions now. Do we want to move on? Oops, did we get another one? Somebody threw one in there, really. Where can we find successful capital stacks that are compatible with home? 4.5 isn't a lot of funding. So a lot of the state's multifamily programs are probably where you're going to look first. Multifamily housing, MHP, No Place Like Home, Home Key, National Housing Trust Fund, Home ARP, and a lot of folks use tax credits. You can also get local monies where your cities and counties, some of the local measures will provide funding. You have to be creative. We realize that $4.5 million is not going to build a project. When do you anticipate making awards for this application round? That was listed in the NOFA. And off the top of my head, I cannot recall what it was originally, but I would expect you would probably be getting award notifications towards the end of 2025. Joe Cerna, yes, is another one, but I caution you when using Joe Cerna because you must rent those units to a farm worker. What if we have several sites for rehab, 4 units, 2 units? If your scattered sites are under single ownership, they may be eligible. I would suggest you meeting with a home team member to kind of talk about the questions that you have surrounding that type of project, and we can spend some time with you helping you figure out what's the best path forward for you, Regina. And then Cindy, please define multifamily. Multifamily rental housing is Just exactly what I say. It's rental housing, like apartment buildings. They are owned by the developer or the operator, and they are not owner occupied. So let's see, we are working on a housing development of 60 low-income senior-focused individual units in a single community. Do they have to be connected to be considered? I don't think they have to be connected. I think that typically it's cost effective to be connected. But they all have to be under single ownership on the same lot or parcel. And Regina, again, if you go back to the first slide, you will want to submit your request for assistance through home NOFA at hcd.ca.gov. And I think I've addressed everybody's questions now. Do we have any more? Okay, I'm going to turn the present. You can continue submitting questions as we go, but I am going to keep this presentation moving. So I'm going to turn the time over to John Marcel. We call him JT here for short. And JT, take it away.
Thank you, Nikki. I'm going to pick up the pace, folks, a little bit because you've had some great questions, and I think this audience might be hungry for questions. So my apologies, but I will go ahead and pick up a little bit. Okay, Jay, go ahead. I'll be covering threshold requirements. Applications must be submitted by way of eCivis. We have instructions on the website, on HCD website, and the applications are due May 24th by 5 p.m. We encourage everybody to submit as early as you can. Waiting until the last minute, there might be a glitch we've experienced in the past, and we do have a time-specific time marker that the portals will close. So if it's after 5 o'clock, you won't even be able to get your submission in. So please make sure to get those in early. Eligible applicants are state recipients. State recipients are cities and counties. We call them SRs. They not designated as a home participating jurisdiction, a PJ, by HUD. What that is, for instance, we are in Sacramento. Sacramento accesses home program funds directly, not through HCD. So that's what a home participating jurisdiction is. Not participating in urban county agreement with a county designated as a PJ. Not participating in a home consortium. Projects and program activities must be located within an applicant's defined service area. City is well defined, counties are well defined. Next slide, Jake. Eligible applicants, continuing here, developers. Developers are, they cannot apply for first-time homebuyer projects, but they can multifamily. CHODOs, community housing development organizations. There are a few within the state that you can search out if you are looking to partner with an applicant or with a party that may have experience with the home program. A CHODO is a nonprofit corporation, and they have to meet HUD CHODO certification requirements. Must be the owner, project owner, sponsor, or developer. So you can partner with a CHODO as a project owner, as a sponsor, or as a developer. And then Native American entities. Next page. Next slide, please. Eligible project location, kind of mentioned this already, must be located within a state home eligible jurisdiction. That is on Appendix A within the NOFA, or tribal lands or tribal applicants. Cities may apply for projects only within their city limits, and counties may apply for projects only within their unincorporated areas. Eligible activities: rental new construction, development of a specific multifamily project on a specific site by a specific developer. Rental new construction projects may be with or without acquisition. No transitional housing is allowed. Nikki had mentioned one of the questions came in about a multifamily project and if they could be separate. And I think the question was that they have 60 units they're looking at. You could have two buildings. So it's not, it doesn't have to be all one building. But as Nikki mentioned, it's might be more cost effective to have it as one building. Next slide, Jay. Rental rehabilitation. So funds provided for rehabilitate a specific rental project on a specific site by a specific developer with or without acquisition of the property. Something to think to compare this to that's kind of we're starting to see more of hotel conversions. So that could be a rehab kind of situation. Rental acquisition only project. Acquisition of a specific multifamily rental project that meets all home requirements, including property standards. Again, transitional housing is not allowed. Next slide, Jay. First-time homebuyer projects. Construction financing must include the following: new construction to develop homes on a specific site. 100% of the home investment must roll over to permanent financing to eligible first-time home buyers. Developers are not eligible for this activity unless applying to do so as an HCD certified CHODO. Next slide. Okay, our applications must include market study, all rental projects, appraisal, all applicants, phase 1, phase 2 environmental review, new construction only. You don't have to have a phase 2, but if a phase 1 calls out for a phase 2, you then need to have a phase 2. Physical needs assessment, lead-based paint and mold, and asbestos, those only apply to rehab or acquisition only projects. And then market comparables for the first-time home buyer. Threshold factors. Continuing on, the applicant must demonstrate its capacity for carrying out the activities assisted with home funds. What this means is we are looking to see that the applicant has experience in dealing with federal funding, various different funding programs. Applicants' site control must be documented. Cities, counties, local public housing authorities, and certain tribal entities must provide documentation satisfactory to the department that they comply with the federal single audit submittal requirements at 2 CRF section 200.512. Outstanding findings may impact the department's ability to grant an award through this NOFA. So any entity that receives federal funds over a certain amount, and it can change from year to year, they must submit a single audit. And then the outstanding findings, if there are findings in that single audit, we need to find out what was done to remedy those findings. Next slide, Jay. There must be no pending litigation for the project. Applicant and any member of its program or project team must not be on the list of federally debarred contractors. Applicant must have no unresolved audit findings. That's what I was just talking about with the single audit. Next slide, Jay. When applying for project activities, the applicant, not the ultimate borrower, must demonstrate documented site control of the project at the time of application. This is very important at the time of application, and it needs to be satisfactory site control. Next slide, Jay. Property must be held in. Now, here are the different types of site control. Property must be in fee simple or leasehold, long-term ground lease, and must provide a grant deed, a purchase or lease agreement with all amendments. Sometimes we don't get all the amendments. Option agreements, disposition and development agreements, exclusive right to negotiate, and conditional contracts. Next slide, Jay. There are 5 acceptable forms of site control that avoid choice limiting NEPA problems. NEPA clearance is very important on all of our projects. And if NEPA isn't clear and an application has done something to the site, that could trigger choice limiting and not be available for the home funds. Site purchase or long-term lease must be consistent with the UMR requirements prior to submitting the home application. Option to purchase must be conditioned on the responsible entity's determination to proceed with the project based on the results of a subsequent environmental review and the receipt of an authority to use grant funds. The cost to secure site control document must be a nominal portion of the purchase price. Next slide, Jay. Purchase agreements, DDA, option to lease, or exclusive right to negotiation may not be conditioned upon NEPA clearance or any other federal requirement. This is an important one. So your agreement cannot have a clause or a calling out in there that it's conditioned on NEPA clearance. A conditional purchase contract may be used for an existing single-family home, 1 to 4 units, or an existing multifamily residential project. A leasehold interest on the project property must comply with all program requirements in compliance with 25 CCR 8316. Next slide, Jay. For more information on these, you can find the CP notice here. If you want to take a second, we'll stay on this page for a moment and you can snip it if you want that, or when we post the webinar, you can get it from there. And we're also going to be supplying the PowerPoint when this is over. But you won't find it for a few days, maybe a week. Next slide, Jay. Now we're on to scoring and ranking, and I'm going to be turning it over to one of my co-workers, Soledad Sandoval.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. I'm Soledad Sandoval, one of the reps in the home program on the project side. I will be reviewing the scoring categories and providing an overview of what each scoring category requires. Next slide, please. We want to know that the scoring factors, and I apologize because on the NOFA and on the Appendix D, they're called scoring factors, but I tend to call them scoring categories because that's how I learned the term. So when I say categories, they mean the same. They have moved, as we mentioned earlier, as Nikki mentioned earlier, they are no longer embedded in the NOFA. There is a new Appendix D, and that is exclusively goes over each scoring category, what each mean. Next slide, please. So overall, we have 8 scoring categories, and please note that a few of them have subcategories within them, such as capacity, community need, and project feasibility. They all can earn up to several hundred points, but within each, there's criteria that must be met to earn those points. Excuse me. Please note, this is a competitive NOFA. Please read the NOFA and please read the Appendix D to be able to get all the information. There is a maximum score of 1,550 points that will be awarded on any application. And all applications must meet a minimum score of 930 in order for any of those projects to be awarded home funds. Next slide, please. Housing element. Cities and counties are required to be in compliance of the state housing element law. Newly incorporated cities are exempt until which time the city is required to submit the housing element to the department for approval. Chodos and projects to be developed on Native American lands are also exempt. Please note this category is worth 50 points. Next slide, please. Formula allocation points. Formula allocation. This category is assigned for those applicants that were eligible to receive HUD direct home allocation, but declined the funds. In this case, then those applicants will receive the 50 points in this category. This is an all or nothing category, so you either get the points or you don't. A jurisdiction that proposes activities are eligible to receive HUD direct homes allocation funds and then declines the funds is when you get the points. Note, please, that HUD will provide an acknowledgement to the applicant of the declination of the home 2024 allocation, which once you receive, you must upload in order for us in order for you to document the reallocation and receive the 50 points. On the rural area, activities proposed in a rural community shall receive full points. If the project is not located in a rural area, you will not receive the points. The project will not receive the points. There is a rural determination worksheet and certification for this NOFA that is made part of the documentations that have been provided in the eCivis application. Please make sure you download that form, you complete it entirely, and you upload as part of your application submission. Next slide, please. Capacity points is discussed very, very briefly earlier. This is one of the categories that has subcategories or sub-factors. In capacity, please note there is going to be a new form that will be required. It's not technically a new form because if any of you have submitted applications, you will recognize the form, but it's going to be made surely part of the rental supplement application supplement, which will be uploaded to the eCivis system shortly. I'm not quite sure what the date is, and we should have it within the next few days, hopefully. So the new application must include what we're going to, I think, be calling the application experience. And this is essentially where you just list your application experience. The applicant must demonstrate experience implementing local, state, or federal affordable housing and or community development projects that it has been awarded. We have a 7-year look back on this, so it would be from January 1st, 2018 to December 31 to 2024, plus year to date 2025. Next slide, please. Next slide is prior performance. I'm sorry, excuse me, I think I skipped one. Again, the development team, there will be another form. You've seen this form, it's just a slightly different version that will be part of the rental project application supplement, which will be, as stated, uploaded to the eCivis system shortly. In this form, the development team must show the project experience developing the same or similar type of subsidized projects. Our look back for this category is 5 years. So we will be going back to January 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2024, plus up to whatever 2025 year to date. Thanks. This category may earn you up to 200 points, and within the Appendix D, you'll have how many, and it's dependent on how many projects you've completed. Next slide, please. Capacity continued. We have prior performance. Prior performance is worth 200 points. And please note on this one, we have had, I think we'll probably mention this several times because this is where people, applicants get confused. All applicants start with 200 points. And within this category, the main category, you may lose points because you failed to meet certain project deadlines, applicant reporting deadlines, there's material misrepresentation, or monitoring non-compliance. The department's look back period for this category, the overall category, is January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2024. Next slide, please. The prior performance within this capacity, within the up to the 200 points that you may, that can be lost. The first one is project reporting. If you will have loss of points, if you do not provide the correct reports and on time. Any home project contract awarded that fails to meet project deadlines will be deducted points in permanent financing. And these are the deadlines that you would need to be compliant with for your past projects. Permanent financing, your project setup deadline, your construction loan closing deadline, your project completion deadline, your expenditure deadline. And again, please review the Appendix D. Each category has a point scale, and it's listed in your Appendix D. Next slide, please. Applicant reporting. This section of it, you may lose up to 50 points. So applicant reporting, applicants that fail to submit required reports may face a deduction of up to 50 points. Late reporting also triggers a loss of points, so please don't lose these points. Applicants may submit missing reports prior to the application deadline to reduce the number of points deducted. So if you have a current project and you have missed any reports, please submit them prior to your submission of for this current NOFA. Each missing report, please note they each carry a different deduction. And there's late submissions also carry a different deduction. Points are deducted per instance up to your maximum deduction of 50 points. For example, if you have one missing monthly status report, that's a 5-point reduction. If you have two, then we will deduct 10 points. Thank you. Next slide, please. Prior performance. Material misrepresentation, this can be up to a 200-point deduction. Any omissions or misrepresentation made by an applicant that could jeopardize the department from funding a project or place the department at risk of a HUD monitoring finding shall have up to a 200-point deduction. And that finding is evidenced by a letter from the department outlining the infraction and the points deduction levied by the department. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are moving on to community need and project feasibility, which are also worth up to 450 points. Community need, it's maybe awarded up to 250 points, and it dependent on the activity type based on the data in Appendix C. We provided the link here, but again, it's on our website. In project feasibility, so project feasibility, we did run into this in our scoring the last couple of NOFAs. There is a self-evaluation worksheet, which is called the financial feasibility worksheet, that is a part of the eCivis application, and that is worth 150 points. And some applicants did not submit that. That is quite a few points to lose for the lack of just submitting the application. So even though we here it's called on our PowerPoint presentation, we're labeling a self-evaluation worksheet. On the eCivis application, it's called the financial feasibility worksheet, and it will have that clearly titled. Next slide, please. Here's a snippet of the Appendix C for rental new construction, and it is listed by jurisdiction. Please make sure you look into the county or the city, depending on where your project's at. And the next following ones are also just snippets of what it looks like. I'm sorry, they only provide, next slide, please. I apologize. I said we provided several snippets, but we only provided the one. So on this Appendix C, I'm going to back up just a little bit. You'll have the rental new construction, you'll have your rehab, and you'll have your acquisition only listed on that. And they're all same thing, you list by jurisdiction. So you will find them all in Appendix C. Next slide, please. Your project readiness. So your project readiness is also has some sub-factors in this, and we actually call that the project development plan or PDP. And they each have several categories that you have to submit. So it's documentation you have to submit. What I would like to bring to your attention, please, is the differences in points and the differences. A couple of the or project types have different requirements. So again, please review the Appendix D, and it will provide you extra additional information. Okay, so for your rental and your construction, here's your list. It's up to 300 points. I think most of you are very familiar with this. Next slide, please. On your rental rehab, what I would like to point out to you, please note the differences in points on your relocation and your GIN, your notice of relocation, and your plan in that. Also like to point out that it is not sufficient for you to say that there is not relocation needed. You must provide the documentation and support of that. And we'll discuss that further a little bit later. Also on for your rental rehab projects, we will require lead, mold, asbestos reports, and we will require a physical assessment. So please note that. Your next slide, please. For your rental acquisition only projects, again, worth 300 points, but please note that for this particular type of project, we are going to require a property standards certification. And the property standards certification is going to need to be, it will also be part of the rental supplement, so you can upload it from there when that becomes available. So it needs to be completed and uploaded with your application. Next slide, please. State objectives. So state objectives, we have 3 state objectives for the state of California. And they, you may be awarded up to 200 points. Okay, so the first is committed financing. Second is recovery assistance for natural disaster survivor. And the third is policy objectives. So though policy objectives, you may earn the points in that if your project addresses special needs populations or serves homelessness or extremely low income. Next slide, please. Committed financing. So up to 100 points can be awarded in this category. Applicants will be scored based on the percentage of non-home permanent financing committed to the project by the application due date. 10 points will be awarded for each 10% increment. For projects, please note this is, we've had this question come up quite a bit. For projects anticipating applying for any type of tax credits, a future tax credit award will not be considered as committed financing and are thus not eligible for these points. However, if the applicant has 50% of its non-home permanent financing committed to the project by the application due date and intends to also apply for tax credits in the future, the application will receive 50 points out of the possible 100 points. Next slide, please. Recovery assistance for natural disaster survivors. This category is worth up to 30 points. And the full points would be awarded for any of the following 4 categories. If the project is located in a state declared disaster area directly impacted by the Boreal fire, or the project is located in a state declared disaster area directly impacted by the Park fire, or the project is located in a federal declared disaster area receiving individual assistance or IA pursuant to HUD memorandum dated May 17, 2023, or the project has been issued an award or conditional award from the department's 2017 and 2018 disaster recovery multifamily program. Okay. We've provided several links to the fire, the disaster. Are those in the next page? I'm sorry. They're not. I apologize for that. I got myself confused. Next slide, please. Okay. Number 3, policy objectives. Special needs populations. This category is it's worth up to 70 points and awarded to propose rental projects with funding commitments that target special needs population using any of the listed programs there. Please note, if serving special needs or homeless populations, the projects must include supportive services in accordance with core components of Housing First under Welfare and Institutions Code, Section 8255. Next slide, please. Or you may, homelessness, the points may be awarded if your project service homeless. Points may be awarded to applicants that propose rental projects primarily serving people experiencing homelessness or those at risk of homelessness as defined in 24 CFR section 578.3. Note again, please, if serving special needs or homeless populations, the projects must include supportive services in accordance with the core components of Housing First. Next slide, please. Third subcategory that may also earn you or be awarded for the points is extremely low income. Up to 70 points may be awarded based on a percentage of the applications that propose rental projects primarily serving extremely low income families. Percent of units committed to special needs, homeless, or early life families, it's based on a scale which we'll show on the following slide. And low-income families are defined as those whose annual incomes do not exceed 30% of the median income. Please note too that this scoring category is not applicable to home buyer projects or first-time home projects, and they cannot receive this point. In the next slide, please. And this is the scale again. This scale is in Appendix D, so you may refer to it. And this is how you can earn the points if you are serving extremely low income population. And that does it for my section. So I'm going to take you to the question, and I'm sure there's quite a few. So if, I think, Nikki, I might throw it back to you because I think you're answering your questions.
Nikki, if you're speaking, you're muted.
Okay. It takes me a minute because there's more than one place to hit unpause. Let's see. So this is a question from Kirsten. A first-time homebuyer program helps people purchase housing. What is an example of a first-time homebuyer project? A first-time homebuyer project is generally a subdivision where you develop several single-family homes that will then be sold as affordable to eligible home app beneficiaries. Jessica asked, would a housing authority that encompasses both a city and a county be considered a state recipient and an eligible applicant? It would be an eligible applicant, but the housing authority must apply as a developer. So Tony Crowder is asking the question, are you saying the state recipient needs to have site control for a new construction project? It's always been acceptable for the ultimate borrower to have site control. The state recipient won't enter into a land purchase contract. You are correct, Tony. For state recipient deals, at the time of application, a sponsor, that would be the sponsor developer, must have site control of the proposed project property in the name of the sponsor or an entity controlled by the sponsor. So if it's going to be the ultimate borrower, the limited partnership must be formed and the limited partnership documents must accompany the application. Becky Forrest asked the question, if the project has an executed memorandum of understanding with the service provider for special needs target population, can state objective points be awarded? I'd have to go back and read the actual NOFA, Becky, to answer your question. I think this would be better submitted through the home NOFA inbox, but I don't believe it's having a memorandum of understanding to provide provide services. I think it has more to do with the number of units targeting that population, but staff, I'm looking to you for help with this one. Anybody have anything to add? Okay, we'll move on. Becky, I'm just gonna put down, yeah, send it to the Home NOFA inbox, Becky, and we'll get back with you. Betsy Wilson asks, can you explain the reasoning for why a purchase agreement cannot be contingent on completion of a NEPA? This seems like it would address the choice limiting action concern. So we follow a CPD notice that has been provided by HUD, and it does not have any carve out in direction for a purchase contract of just land that contains the NEPA language. It never hurts if you can get a condition in the purchase agreement. However, the direction in our CPD notice is for options to purchase, which are slightly different than a purchase agreement, because a purchase agreement binds the buyer and the seller, where an option purchase just binds the seller to sell it if all the requirements are met. The link to that CPD notice is in your NOFA. Let me get down here. Can these funds be used for veterans? You can always have a target population for veterans to be tenants in your project, but the home funds are not specifically targeting veterans. They target all populations. It says, if a city is not shown on Appendix C for rating for rental new construction needs, do we use the county instead? Why don't you reach out to us through the NOFA inbox, Barbara, and we will research why the city is not on that list. And then Robert says, will there be office hours for individual questions? We haven't really set up office hours specifically because we have a limited number of staff and we need to keep them focused on work. However, we will schedule technical assistance meetings through Teams for anybody that is interested. And one of the things that I failed to mention when I was making my original comments at the beginning of the meeting is I wanted to talk for just a couple of minutes about some of the challenges that we had with our scoring criteria. And there were a couple of instances in particular that we really struggled with this year. And so we sent out more, we probably had more point score adjustments than normal, and then we had more point score appeals as a result. So in an effort to reduce these, I kind of wanted to talk about them for a few minutes here, and I'll let you know kind of what the challenges were and what we're doing with the application and what our expectations are for documentation in the application when you submit your application this next round. The first is in the area of applicant experience and developer experience. And there's some significant differences for a state recipient developer partnership than there is, let me turn on my camera, than there is for just a developer. And so I wanted to talk about these state recipient developer applicants for just a minute. When we are talking about experiencing, managing, funding for a state recipient developer applicant, we are talking about the state recipient's experience. not the developer's experience. We want to know that the state recipient has the knowledge and capacity to manage this developer contract. Many of our applications for state recipients came in with no state recipient experience, only developer experience. But we want to see the state recipient's experience there. And so we sent out a number of point score letters that required additional information. We didn't throw them out. We didn't, say they couldn't add more information to their application. But this next round, we are changing our supplemental application and the instructions in it to make it clear for state recipient developer applications. We want to see the state recipient's experience first, and then the developer application will get the additional 200 points. But that 50 points, it starts with state recipient expertise, and if they don't have sufficient to get 50 points, we want to know that. We need to know that so that we can guide our state recipients in how to become successful submitting an application to manage a developer project. The other thing that we really struggled with was the zoning form, the zoning approvals form where you just check a bunch of boxes. You're supposed to just put in a few dates. If you say not applicable, you're supposed to say why it's not applicable. However, we find if these forms are not filled out correctly, they're not sufficient enough for us to determine if local approvals are really received or not. So we are going to beef up the way those forms are completed, and we are going to ask for supporting documentation to, especially if you're going through a ministerial type of approval period or zoning approval, which is basically has been implemented the last few years to cut the red tape to get projects built. And so just be looking for those things. Those, I think, were two of the really biggest things that we experienced with our point scores, where we really struggled and had to go back and forth. In years, we were really consistent with all the applicants, and we treated them all the same. But we wrote a ton of letters this year, and doing the evaluation and then doing these original letters and handling the appeals delayed our ability to get to our awards done on time. And so that's why we're behind. So I just wanted to give folks a little bit of heads up that there's some changes coming in the supplemental. There's going to be some additional documentation that's going to be requested in some places. And we're hoping that this will streamline our evaluation and our point score periods so that we have more point scores that are self scores and final scores that match. So there's less appeals and less letters to write. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. So everyone, we're going to take a break until exactly 3 o'clock. So you have the better part of 7 minutes to go refresh, and we'll see you back here at 3. Thank you. Okay, we're on break for about 2 more minutes. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Welcome back. It's 3 o'clock and we're going to resume.
Thank you, Jay. And again, thank you, Soledad, for your scoring and ranking presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Looking at the attendee list, I recognize quite a few names that I've worked with in the past, in my past projects and my current projects. So welcome. I hope you're all recharged from the break. My name is Christopher Janillo. I'm a Home Rep 2 for the Home Projects team, and I will be talking about the information and documentation in regards to scoring and ranking. Next slide, please, Jay. So again, this was mentioned earlier, the scoring factors are now in our Appendix D. The rental supplement has been updated. It will include the applicant experience. You can find both the Appendix D and the rental supplement in our HCD website and in the under the Home Investment Partnerships Program Notice of Funding section, and in the e-Civis Solicitations Files tab. We are still finalizing a few details on the rental supplement, so that will be available soon at both locations. Next slide, please. So you want to make sure once the rental supplement is available, you want to look at that along with the NOFA. The rental supplement will help guide and explain a few items, especially with different categories within the NOFA that will help you build create a better application. There are 5 categories for scoring, and those include the project development plan, PDP for short, zoning, local government approvals, design progress, and your permanent financing. Next slide, please. So points will be awarded if the PDP item is included with the application. It has to be recent, so we'll talk about the shelf life of various documents in the upcoming slides. It must meet basic requirements, and those they must be made to the correct standard, and they must be prepared by a qualified preparer, and that goes for rental new construction and rehabilitation projects. Next slide, please. Again, the PDP items are your market study, your appraisal, your phase 1, phase 2, if the phase 1 calls for it, your VES, which is your vapor encroachment screening, and that's for new construction only, your floodplain analysis, your lead-based paint report, your asbestos report, your mold report, and that's for rehab, your construction cost estimate, for rental new construction, your scope of work and cost estimate for rehab, and your physical needs assessment or P&A for rehab and your relocation. Next slide, please. So again, the shelf life for the market study, it must be prepared in 2024. We're not going to accept market studies prepared earlier than that. Must meet the TCAC 2024 market study guidelines. When this PowerPoint is uploaded into our HCD website, the link in this slide will direct you to the 2024 market study guidelines. Next slide, please. The appraisal. Appraisal must not be prepared no earlier than 2024. It's required for all acquisitions, but it's not required if the land is donated. So there should not be any land costs in the development budget. There should not be a capital contribution for that. So the value of the capital contribution must also be supported by the appraisal. Next slide, please. Thank you. So your phase 1 and your phase 2 site assessments. So phase 1 and your phase 2, if it's required by phase 1, must be prepared no earlier than 2023. So take note of this. So we give you 2 years for your phase 1 and your phase 2, compared to the market study and your appraisal that is only 1 year. So the phase 1 in your VES, it has to be to the ASTM standard of E1527-21, and your phase 2 must be to the ASTM standard of E1903-19. Next slide, please. For your floodplain analysis, the flood cert is required on all projects, even though the project is not in a flood zone. If the subject property is not in a flood zone, you still need to provide the flood cert and mark that it is not in a flood zone. That could be on the FEMA flood hazard determination form OMB number 1660-0040, must be prepared in 2024, must be prepared by flood certification service or other qualified third party. And again, it's required on all projects. Next slide, please. So if any portion of the site is in a floodplain, then you have to do the following. You must demonstrate floodplain incidental to the project. That could include providing the FEMA flood hazard determination form. It should indicate that no buildings are in a floodplain, and recorded covenants or restrictions are required. Or you have obtained a FEMA conditional letter of map revision or a CLOMR, and that letter must be included in the application. Or you intend to obtain a CLOMR, and a narrative explanation of the intent is included, and the CLOMR is provided prior to loan closing. Next slide, please. So HUD ideally does not want you to build on the floodplain, but if it is built on the floodplain, there's an 8-step process that we review for that. I've only listed a couple of the steps here in that 8-step process. The actual 8-step process is uploaded into our eCivis solicitations files tab, and that document is called Floodplain Management 8-Step Decision-Making Process Flowchart. So please take a look at that if your project is in a floodplain. And this also applies to rehabilitation projects. Next slide, please. For new construction, your preliminary cost estimate, it must be prepared in 2024. Of course, you're going to upload it to the eCivis portal. It must be consistent with the development budget, or an explanation must be provided to support any differences. And the preparer could be your general contractor, but it's not limited to your architect. Next slide, please. For rehab projects, your preliminary cost estimate, your detailed scope of work is prepared no more than 6 months prior to application due date listed in this NOFA. Project must meet local codes and rehab standards, consistent with P&A identified immediate needs, includes work identified in a P&A as needed in the first 5 years of the project, and must use the same cost estimate form as a rental new construction project. Next slide, please. For your rehab, your your physical needs assessments or P&A. It must be prepared no earlier than 2024. And it's prepared to the Fannie Mae guidelines, the HUD mark-to-market program. Again, this is a link. It must meet additional home requirements. And for USDA RD projects, the USDA RD capital needs assessment is acceptable. So the appropriate licensed architect or engineer in business of performing P&As must sign off on your P&A. Next slide, please. Your lead, asbestos, and your mold reports. All three reports must be prepared no earlier than 2024, and it must be prepared by a properly certified or accredited preparer. And all reports must be submitted in order to earn points for this particular category. Next slide, please. For your lead-based paint reports, again, we're talking about rehab projects only. If it's required if the subject property is built prior to January 1, 1978. It must be prepared by state-certified lead-based paint inspector assessor, and the mitigation must demonstrate compliance with the home rehabilitation standards. Next slide, please. Again, for your asbestos report, it requires analysis from the environmental laboratory accredited by the National Institute of Standards and Technology Asbestos Program. Next slide, please. Your mold report, it must be based on a thorough building inspection, and it must inspect and test hidden areas if it's required, if it's needed. And it must be prepared by a third party having sufficient qualification and expertise to competently prepare the report. Next slide, please. Now your relocation information notice or your GIN and your plan. So these documents are required. So we want one copy of your actual GIN, your tenant notification list, your proof of delivery, and your relocation plan that is prepared and or updated in 2024. Do not lose points by not submitting all the required documentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so the zoning, local approvals, and fees. We have a lot of prior applicants that have left a lot of points on the table regarding these three forms. These three forms are very important, and we don't want you to lose points over something that could be completely avoidable. So please make sure that all three forms are fully completed and submitted at the application in order to obtain the full points. These forms are the verification of zoning and other local approvals, the verification of local development impact fees, and your verification of water and sewer availability. Now, applicants will mark NA or not applicable to some of these items on these forms. That is not satisfactory to us. If any item is marked as NA or not applicable, we require a documented explanation as to why it is not applicable. In addition, these forms have two signatures on them, usually the developer and the local official. Previous applicants have lost points because they only provided one of the signatures, whether it's the developer or just the local official. We require both to ensure that it is a completed form. So don't lose points on that. So you need both signatures on these forms. Now, the approval dates, for the local approval dates, if the local approval dates are expected local approval dates, those do not receive points. Jay, if you can go back one slide. Thank you. So the expected local approval dates do not receive points. Approvals must be received by the time of and submitted with the application. So just please take a note of that. So these three forms are very important. These are, I believe these are 80 points. So you don't want to lose 80 plus points on something that it can easily be completed. So make sure we have both signatures. Make sure that any NAs are explained and provided to us at application, and make sure that your local approval dates are received by the time and submitted at the application point. We do not count expected local approval dates. Next slide, please. So again, these are points for the various documents that we require. Each activity has different point counts. There's more detail in the Appendix D, but again, there's a note at the bottom in red that the expected approval dates do not receive points. So approval dates must be received by the time of and submitted applications. Again, all non-applicable items have to be fully documented and explained. Next slide, please. So your design progress, it must be executed agreement with the architectural firm. There's a letter of architect or the construction specialist stating the status of plans and specifications. And there's 3 statuses listed below. Each, depending on what you pick here, depending on the status of your plans and specifications, will generate different points. So the statuses are, it's ready to submit to the planning department, or there's preliminary plans and specifications, or it's just conceptual, which is just elevation and floor plans. So depending on what you pick here on your design progress, it will generate a different set of points. And there's a different set of points for rental new construction versus rehabilitation. Next slide, please. The percent of your non-home financing committed. So there's different points for different activities. So 25 points for new construction, 35 points for rehabilitation, 75 points for acquisition only. Your permanent financing is an enforceable commitment. No conditions or qualifiers other than standard conditions. And we'll touch base on that in the next slide. Must include borrower's name, project name, address, or legal description, and must state the loan terms. Again, you can read your rental supplement for further details. That will be available soon. Next slide, please. Permanent financing. Again, there's different points for each activity: new construction, rental rehab, and your rental acquisition only. Now, this is for permanent financing. If take note of this, because it's very important, because we have had past applicants that just because you have a commitment letter, you have to read the details, and there's one particular detail which will disqualify it from making it a permanent financing commitment letter for us to count that towards your points. If your perm financing letter is contingent on the receipt of tax credits, then it cannot be counted as being committed. So I want you to take note of that. So if your letter is showing that it needs tax credits, contingent upon you're going to receive the award based on the tax credits for that particular commitment letter, we at the department cannot count that as a committed permanent financing. And tax credits take a while to be approved. So at application, we're only counting permanent financing that is committed permanent financing that is not contingent upon tax credits. Next slide, please.
Chris, let me break in here a second.
Yes.
We did this slide was meant to be changed out with one that didn't have question marks in the 3rd column. So when you receive the slide deck, folks, you'll get one that's got all the points on there. So we apologize for that.
So I think that we're at the Q&A part. So do we have any questions available?
Yes, we do. We have a couple of questions that have been lingering. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The first question is a follow-up question. Is a housing authority that encompasses just a city considered a state recipient? And the answer to that question is no. You must be a city or a county or a tribally designated housing authority. Public housing authorities that support cities and counties are not considered an eligible state recipient. And then let's see, the next question is from Becky Flores. The Home Supplement in eCivis says 2022-2023. Is this the correct version? And Becky, I am so glad you asked, because the answer is it is not the correct version. We are working on the changes in the supplemental to support the new additional documentation that will need to be submitted for experience and zoning documentation. So we will be uploading a new supplemental form into eCivis, and we will be posting the correct supplemental form on the HCD website as soon as it is ready. We anticipate having that ready to go before the 20th, on or before the 20th of February. So watch for it. I would suggest not filling it out until you get the new version. And Robert Waldow, hi, will the slide deck be sent out to the email on file, and when? Robert, you can request through the Home NOFA inbox a copy of the slide deck. However, the slide deck will be available on the HCD website shortly after this webinar completes. Any other questions? Oh, nope, I guess I answered that one. Okay.
Okay, great. So if we don't have any other questions, thank you so much for my presentation. I'm gonna throw it out to Francesca Wander, who will be presenting the project feasibility, financial feasibility section. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everybody for attending on this dreary day. I am going to talk about project feasibility. There are 4 components of project feasibility once you've passed threshold, once you've gone through scoring, rating, and ranking. If you've scored enough to move forward, you move into project feasibility. And those 4 components consist of our evaluation of the appraisal that you've submitted, our evaluation of the market study that you've submitted. We do very in-depth financial feasibility, which is the main topic I'm going to be covering with you. And then we also do an in-depth analysis of your phase 1 for a NEFA feasibility as well. So the topics that I'm going to cover will be financial feasibility specifically, as well as the review of your phase 1 feasibility. And then I'll also talk a little bit more about relocation at the end. So next slide, please. So as far as financial feasibility, first and foremost, please make sure you become very familiar with the current home income, home rent, home subsidy, and in the case of first-time home buyer, which you will hear about if you come back to visit with us again on Tuesday of next week, home ownership value limits. All of these limits can be found on the HCD website at the link shown here. Next slide, please. Specifically, by way of example, we're just providing you with a little snip of the Home 2024 income limits. They are organized by county, so you'll make sure that you're familiar with those and that your income, the income levels of your residents don't pass these income limits. Next slide, please. Next, here are the current home per unit subsidy limits, which we talked about a little bit earlier, by bedroom size for all counties. Next slide, please. And this one is the home program rent limits, the maximum rents your units may not exceed by bedroom size. Again, also available on the HCD website. Next slide, please. And for first-time home buyers specifically, which will be presented on Tuesday, here are those home ownership value limits, the limits beyond which the value of the home may not exceed. Next slide, please. Thank you. Jay, did you, oh no, never mind. Sorry about that. I'm on the correct slide. For those of you who might be familiar with the Home Universal application from prior years, also referred to as the UA, or during our last NOFA, the mini UA, that has been replaced by what we are calling the multifamily application workbook, which is based, as has always been the case, on current home loan and rent limits. We will be providing a demonstration of this new workbook very shortly. As in prior NOFAs, you will also want to refer to, as we've mentioned earlier, the home rental project supplement once it is posted to eCivis, in addition to the NOFA itself, which is already available on the website. Appendix D of the NOFA, to which we've referenced earlier, which is new this year, as well as always HCD's Uniform Multifamily Regulations, commonly referred to as UMRs, as well as all applicable state and federal home regulations. So there are a lot of sources of information with which you will need to and want to be familiar to maximize your competitiveness in your application. Next slide, please. Next, I'd like to spend a little bit of time discussing, Next, I'd like to spend a little bit of time discussing how to determine the maximum loan amount for which you can apply through a process that we call subsidy layering analysis. The maximum home funds allowed for a project is the lesser amount as determined by performing the following 3 tests up to the current maximum home NOFA limit of $4.5 million. The first test is called the ratio test. The ratio, which is the ratio of home funds requested to the total eligible development costs, cannot exceed the ratio of the home units to the total number of units in the project. Otherwise, home would be subsidizing non-home assisted units. The second test is the home subsidy per home assisted unit test, wherein the amount of home funds requested cannot exceed the total of the home assisted units times their respective per unit subsidy limits for the current year. Bear with me. The third test, cost allocation method. The amount of home funds requested cannot exceed the ratio of home square footage to total square footage in the project times total development costs. Otherwise, home would be subsidizing construction costs of non-home assisted units, and that is not allowed. Don't worry about trying to memorize what I've just said or worrying about what you see on the slide. As part of the application process, you will be completing, as referenced earlier, a financial feasibility worksheet that walks you through each of these calculations. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, the Home UA has been replaced by the Home NOFA Multifamily Application Workbook. The following 2 slides list the tabs that will appear on that worksheet that you will complete. So here are the tabs that will be appearing on, here are the tabs on the first slide that cover about the first half of the workbook. And then next slide, please. Here are the remaining tabs that will compose the multifamily application workbook that you will be completing. And at this point, next slide, please. Thank you. I'm going to take a quick diversion here and turn your attention over to Joe McNicholas, who is going to conduct a live demonstration of the application workbook to give you a good idea of how you will be completing that during the application process. So take it away, Joe.
Thank you, Francesca. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can, Joe.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Joseph McNicholas, and I will be representing the eCivis solicitation portal along with the new Home 2024 NOFA multifamily application workbook.
And Joe, you were in your we're in your preview mode, so you're not in the present mode right now, just so you know.
Okay.
Yeah, the little icon at the top. There.
All right, got it. Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. My presentation will consist of a slideshow as well as a live demonstration of the workbook and eCivis. The first step is accessing eCivis and setting up an account. The link to the eCivis is provided in this slideshow, which will be available on the home website. Once you select the eCivis link, you'll need to create an eCivis account. I would like to emphasize that eCivis is a web-based portal where you complete and submit your home workbook application, among other uploads such as an appraisal, market study, title report. The user eCivis manual is available on the eCivis solicitation page. After one profile is set up to access eCivis, please grant access to 2 additional staff within the application as a backup. Otherwise, only one person will have access. After you have created your eCivis account, you will need to visit the home web page, which is located within the main HCD website. The required Excel Home Multifamily Workbook is accessible at Home's website only. The Home Excel Workbook is not available in eCivis. Once you are in the Home website, you'll find the Notice of Funding icon among many other icons on the website. To find the links to the Excel Home Workbook and the link to the Home eCivis solicitations, select the Notice of Funding icon. Download the Home 2024 NOFA Multifamily Application Workbook, which is only available on the Home website. Although the 2024 Home NOFA has 5 different solicitations, there is only one workbook. The Excel workbook will support the 5 solicitations. In summary, one workbook for the 5 solicitation options. By selecting the eCivis Grants Management System link within the Notice of Funding option, you'll be taken into eCivis. Once you're inside eCivis, you will find the 5 solicitation options. You will notice there is a rental new construction and a first-time home buyer solicitations. Again, the Excel workbook will support any of the options you choose within eCivis. Now I'll be showing you a live demonstration of the workbook. The live demonstration will be an overview of the workbook and is not intended to be an all-encompassing training on the workbook. Now I'm in the workbook that you will download from the home webpage. Once you've downloaded the home workbook, there may be an Enable Content or an Enable Macros button at the top of the workbook. Select this button to enable the content and the macros so the workbook will function correctly. You will notice the tabs or selections along the workbook at the bottom. You will need to complete these tabs in order from left to right. The first tab is an instruction tab. Please follow these instructions. Do not cut and paste cells and forms within this workbook. And do not cut and paste between other workbooks and this workbook. For example, if you have a team completing this workbook and one team is working on the unit mix and another one is working on project overview, another one is doing the scoring, and they all have 3 separate workbooks, and they want to cut and paste their work into one final workbook, that is not advised, and that would pick up many formulas, and essentially the workbook would not function. Have your team work on one single workbook. The second is the home cover page. And the Entity Org Docs tab is a reference tab to inform you which organizational docs may apply to your organizational structure. Your data input portion of the workbook starts at the Project Overview tab. Please note that the cells you encounter in this workbook will be different colors. A yellow cell is an unprotected cell which requires data input from the sponsor. An orange cell alerts you that a document may be needed to upload it into eCivis. Blue cells are scoring cells, and red cells alert you that data you have entered has failed to meet a requirement or additional input is necessary. You'll notice that some of the input fields have drop-downs and some are free-form. For example, on row 12, you would describe any exceptional circumstances. I'd like to point out at row 17, you will encounter a drop-down, which provides a choice of which county your project resides in. I would like to demonstrate that additional sections of the workbook will open based on how the preceding question was answered. For example, in row 25, you'll notice the drop-down is yes or no. If you select yes, that you intend to apply or have been awarded funds, HCD funds for this project, you'll notice that a macro is running and additional questions will be required. This will take a few seconds for these cells to open up and these columns to be visible. As you've noticed, if you're planning to apply or have been awarded funds, we'll ask you some more questions about the award or the potential award you may be receiving. On row 69, you will notice there is a red caret. You can hover over this and it will be informational and can help you answer what needs to be input into this box. You will find these red carets throughout the workbook. Am I still on, Jay?
You're back on. You were gone for just a second, Joe.
Okay, I'm back.
Yep.
Okay, all right, I will continue. Um, so on row
Yeah, you're
85,
not sharing, Joe,
yeah,
yeah, you'll need to
it
share
kicked me
again.
out, and
I'll tell you once your screen's being shared, Joe.
sorry about that, everyone. Okay.
I promise to give you feedback, Joe, if you drop out or your screen drops out on us, but we're just I'll tell you when your shared screen is back up. Zoom's a little tricky to use, just so the audience knows.
Yeah, I'm not seeing. Here we go. It gave me the boot, and
Yeah.
okay,
Here it
am I
comes.
back? Okay,
You're good to go,
thank you.
Joe.
Sorry, things happen. So on row 85, let me continue. On row 85, you want there's one of the many upload prompt fields. This is to alert you that once in eCivis, which I will demonstrate later, you will need to upload a document. Not every upload field will apply to your project. For example, if this applied to the project, I would put a yes here. And I will demonstrate later how this will be tracked in a document checklist to help you keep track of which documents you need to upload. On row 91, you will see a blue link, and if this will, you click on the link, and you'll be taken to a web page or a source document to assist you in answering the question. On row 99, you could enter the entity name. And I'd like to demonstrate that once you've entered the sponsor's name, it'll carry over through many of these other tabs in the workbook. On row 259, there are many note sections where you can freeform or provide additional information or explanations to your answer. The explanations or clarifications you provide will be reviewed by your HCD home team. I'm going to put a few more yeses in here to show you how they carry over. On row 300, you'll see one of the red outline boxes. This is to emphasize that data in this section will carry over to many other required sections or other tabs in the workbook. So when you see this a red outline, please enter the data here. On row 436 is where you'll enter the project milestone dates. The milestone dates you provide will be memorialized in the standard agreement if you receive an award. Again, at the bottom of the project overview tab, you can provide additional comments if necessary. Many of these other tabs have opportunities for you to comment. The next tab is the unit mix. I will go ahead and enter some numbers here. There we go. Just some just for my demonstration here. And you will notice based on these numbers that I've input, it'll give me a potential home loan amount. I would like to demonstrate why it's important to complete all these tabs from left to right. For example, if you had gone out of order of the tabs and had not entered the county here, you'll notice the macro does not know which county the property is located in and does not know the rent limits, and you would get a 0 here. Again, please complete these tabs in order. I will enter a few more numbers here to show you how it carries over. Here's the contact list. As you can see how I had previously entered the applicant or sponsor's name, it's carried over. Many other fields will be carrying over. In the development sources, I'll demonstrate. I will input the name of a bank here, and it will also carry over. As you complete the workbook from left to right for the first time, you'll notice that some cells are empty, and many of these empty cells will be pre-filled after the entire workbook is completed from left to right. On development budget, I will just enter some a number, and you'll see how it's carried over. You will notice that the ABC bank that I entered on the previous tab has carried over here. Another tab I'll show you is cash flow. As you can see, the rents I entered and some of the expenses are already carrying over to the cash flow. You'll need to complete all these tabs. Here is the home scoring tab, which I'd like to point out. You will take these self scores and enter these scores into Zengin. The blue cells are protected cells, and they will capture your score. For example, for Section A, if your housing is in compliance, if you enter yes, notice you have 50 points, and your 50 points has come up to the top here. You will need to complete all sections of the home scoring to get your correct score. I'll point out, for example, on Section E, that you need to complete all these cells to obtain your score. For example, if I enter a date that is not within the 5-year period, which is January 1st, 2020, I will not receive any score. If I enter a date which is within the 5-year period, I will get the score. So it's very important to complete all these cells. As you notice, the scores will carry up to the top. I'd like to show you the document checklist. As previously, I had stated that I had uploaded some documents. Notice I have a yes here. So this is a good, all the upload fields, if you put a yes, you can track it here on the document checklist. So once you've completed the Excel workbook, you should return and review all the Excel tabs again for accuracy. After the entire workbook is complete, all the calculations will function correctly. So once you've completed this and saved it, you need to upload it into eCivis. So let me demonstrate briefly.
Joe, you got muted. You got muted just now.
And Joe, before you move into eCivis, there's 2 questions in the chat regarding the workbook that maybe you can answer quickly and then go into eCivic? You want me to read those? The first one is, do the workbook cells for narrative have character limits? And Joe, you're still muted.
Do they
There you
have
go.
limits? Yes, they're not. Yes, there would be limits on how long you could write a narrative. In eCivis, there are many upload fields that just say additional commentary if necessary. So if you had a very long explanation or narrative or supporting documentation that didn't quite fit any of the uploads, you could upload it into one of the quote additional document fields into eCivis, which once you're in eCivis, you'll see you have many opportunities for additional documentation. So there is a limit in eCivis how long you could write out a narrative.
And the second question was row 15 in the project overview. I guess somebody's following along. Row 15 in the project overview tab appears to be locked. Can't see project activity.
Okay, so we had an update. They must have gone in there and got the workbook. There is an update to fix that. So that should be available soon, probably by today. So I would just wait and get the workbook a little bit later today. Thank you for pointing that out. That was a minor error that we corrected. So let me show you eCivis. Okay. So here we are in eCivis. You've set up your profile and you go into eCivis. And some of the information that you've entered on the workbook, you will have to enter again into eCivis. For example, the project name, you would have to enter twice. There's many items, unfortunately, you need to enter 2 times. You will notice here it's telling you have 170 days remaining to submit. That's kind of a good alert. I'm going to go into application summary. And here is where you would upload your workbook. If you see a red asterisk by an upload field or a question, that means it's required. You cannot complete a form in eCivis if there are any red asterisk areas that were not completed. As you see in eCivis, you would complete, just as the workbook, you went and completed all the tabs. You need to complete these forms in eCivis. Once all these are marked as complete, you will get a green submit button and you can submit your application. Notice the commentary here that once you submit it, you'll not be able to make any changes. For the self-scoring, just enter the numbers from the self-score on the workbook into eCivis. So now that ends my live demonstration. I'll be returning back to my slideshow for a brief wrap-up.
And Joe, there was one follow-on question on the
Okay.
workbook to
Sure.
specifically what is the character limit, if you know, what is the character limit for the narrative fields? Do you have an answer to that?
They're all different sizes. So yeah, I couldn't tell you specifically if they're all just set differently. So again, in eCivis, you can there's many opportunities for additional commentary. And you'll once you're in there, you'll see the additional upload fields and explanation fields I've provided there. So let me, again, to summarize, the yellow fields are applicant input, orange cells are required attachment, blue cells keep track of your self-score, red cells are meant to indicate a failed requirement or alert you of additional input, and white cells are protected, which may contain additional instructions, headings, or descriptions. After the Excel Home 2024 NOFA Multifamily Workbook is completed, the applicant will now complete the application submittal process via eCivis. Some of the information, yes, will need to be entered twice. When you complete every step, you hit the green submit button.
Hey, Joe, real quick, you're not in
Yes.
presenter mode, so I think we're seeing a different slide than you're looking at, maybe.
Okay.
Zoom makes it hard to know which PowerPoint side. You might need to flip them.
Okay. Can you see it now?
Perfect.
Okay. Basically, in summary, many of the upload fields have the red asterisk, they're marked as required. If you encountered a required upload field but the document requested does not apply to your project, upload a document stating not applicable. Only one document can be uploaded per upload field. If you need to upload multiple documents into a single upload field, then convert the documents to a single large zip file. That concludes my demonstration. I'd like to return it over to Francesca.
Thank you, Joe, again for that excellent presentation. Despite our Zoom and connectivity challenges with which we always seem to have to deal, I appreciate it. So I just wanted to reemphasize, as if Joe hasn't already emphasized it enough, to take certain cautions as you complete that multifamily application workbook. Again, I think Joe made the strong case to make sure that you complete each tab in order, because the macros connect, otherwise the macros won't work. Information on tabs to the left will impact what you see on tabs to the right and what tabs you see in general. Make sure that you complete every tab as fully and completely as you possibly can in the yellow cells that contain those red carets for further instruction. And make sure that you upload your completed workbook into eCivis along with everything. And I also want to stress something that Joe mentioned is hold off until start completing your application as soon as you can, but don't be in a rush to submit it, because once you submit, that's it. You can complete every section and go back and update sections if you want to make corrections or changes throughout the application period, and then submit at the end. So just make sure that you don't submit prematurely to make sure that you've made all corrections and all changes and gotten your application as perfect as it can be before you do finally hit that submit button. So next slide, please. Some other things that I would just like to sort of emphasize after Joe's presentation and demonstration. With regard to rent and unit mix, please make sure that you enter rent for manager's unit only if you are actually charging rent for that unit. Otherwise, you want to leave that field blank. Secondly, both proposed and maximum rent columns should be completed, whether or not they're different from one another. You want to make sure that both columns are completed. And you also want to make sure to enter complete subsidy information for any project-based vouchers that you are using on the project. And please be aware, if you aren't already, that tenant-based vouchers are not allowed on home projects, only project-based. Next slide, please. Thank you. Specific to senior debt, I just wanted to point out a couple of items with respect to senior debt being part of your funding sources. Please note the following important limitations regarding senior debt. Loans with balloon payments. So for instance, we oftentimes see loans that are amortized on a 30-year basis, but must be paid off at 15, for example, as well as what we call sandwich loans, where you have tax credits and the equity investor, if any, associated with those tax credits, and the senior lien holder, the senior debt holder are related parties or the same. In either of those cases, balloon payments or sandwich loans, you must comply with the 2017 UMR sections 8310 and 8315. Secondly, if your senior lien has an interest rate reset, that reset must have a cap. We will underwrite at that cap maximum, and the project at that cap maximum must remain feasible at that maximum cap rate upon reset for the full 20 years. Next slide, please. Onto the development budget. Please make sure that you are using the lesser of land cost or value. Any amount of the appraised value, any amount of the appraised value, actual sales price over the appraised value cannot be paid with home funds. However, reasonable verified carrying costs are allowed for reimbursement of holding costs. So again, lesser of land cost or value, and if your actual sales price exceeds value, home will not pay for the excess above the appraised value. That would have to be paid for through another funding source. Next slide, please. More on the development budget. Please just also make sure to allocate costs to all of these following items if they are applicable to your application. So your phase one may call for some environmental remediation. You want to make sure that you budget for that. If there's any relocation costs that are involved, make sure you budget for that as well. There's several lines that are available where you can enter other expenses that aren't specified on the development budget. Please make sure you specify what those other items are. And then finally, as far as specifically contractor overhead, profit and general requirements, those items may not exceed 14% of construction costs as determined by TCAC. Next slide, please. As far as contingencies, please note providing for construction contingencies are a requirement in your development budget. In new construction, that construction contingency must be at least 5% of your total construction costs, excluding contractor liability insurance. And on rehab and conversion projects, those contingencies must be at least 10% of your total construction cost, excluding contractor liability insurance. Next slide, please. As far as replacement reserves are concerned, replacement reserves are required for all projects. All these are actually to be included as part of your operating budget. Replacement reserves are not permitted to be capitalized as part of your development budget for rental new construction unless required by another funding source, in which case that requirement must be clearly documented in your application if you wish to capitalize those reserves. We'll talk more about replacement reserves when we get to the operating budget. Next slide, please. A recent change, although not brand new, but in the last NOFA or since the last NOFA, is regarding transition reserves. For projects that are using project-based vouchers or subsidies, a transition reserve has long been required to prevent tenant displacement in the event that the subsidies are not renewed, typically after the first 20 years. To meet this requirement now, you may participate in what is called a pooled transition reserve, which is calculated at 15% of the year one projected subsidy income. Again, this was introduced after last year's NOFA. It's not brand new, but it was introduced since last year's NOFA. Home funds, however, cannot be used to capitalize this reserve. Other funds must be used to capitalize this 15% transition reserve. Please refer to the memo that is referenced here on the slide for more information. Next slide, please. I mentioned operating replacement reserves being a part of the operating budget. So as referenced earlier, replacement reserves are required on all rental new construction and rental rehab projects. We're in the process of confirming that this is also a requirement for rental acquisition. We'll let you know when we have an answer to that question. In the case of rental new construction, the reserve amount is equal to 0.6% of your estimated construction cost, or $500 per unit, whichever is less. In the case of rental rehab, the deposit shall be consistent with the long-term needs identified in the physical needs assessment, or $500 per unit. Next slide, please. Please make sure to include all required payments on your operating budget. Oftentimes, some of these items are left off, and we have to add them on to make sure that they're accounted for on the expense side of your equation so that your cash flow is cash flowing correctly. So some of these items include, but are not limited to, of course, all mandatory debt service must be included. Something that is oftentimes overlooked is that 0.42% annual payment that's required for most, although not all, HCD programs, such as MHP and many others. Home monitoring fees is oftentimes left off of the application operating budget. So make sure that you check back to see what your home monitoring fees are going to be for this year based upon the number of units in your project, and make sure that you include that on your operating budget. And all bond and other servicing fees and other items that are relevant to your annual operating budget should be included under miscellaneous financial expenses. And then please, as Joe pointed out, make sure that you use those comment fields or the note fields to explain what those items are. Next slide, please. And with regard to home monitoring fees, specifically, as we learned earlier in the presentation, home monitoring fees are required for CHODAs and developers based upon the number of home units in the project. However, state recipients may or may not charge home monitoring fees not to exceed the state home monitoring fees presented earlier. So they must be, and in any case, these home monitoring fees must be clearly stated in your regulatory agreement, and 10% of all home monitoring fees must be remitted to the state. So one of the main takeaways of this slide is that home monitoring fees are required for CHODAs and developers per the home monitoring fee chart presented earlier in this presentation. State recipients may charge home monitoring fees. We don't require it. We certainly suggest it, but they may not exceed the amounts required by CHODAs or developers. Next slide, please. In regard to cash flow analysis, some of these issues have been addressed by the fact that we are now using a workbook that is more tightly buttoned down, if you will, than our old UA. But you know, it really speaks to the point that you want to complete the workbook from left to right in all yellow fields as much as possible. There's very little room to change anything anymore these days, which helps keep things consistent. What we do look for, however, on that cash flow is we want to make sure that your first year debt service coverage ratio, or DSCR, is between 1.1 and 1.2. This prevents, quite honestly, the project throwing off too much cash. And that is not necessarily going to funding home units. If that debt service cash ratio is less than 1.1%, that tells us that there's too many expenses or a 20-year positive cash flow. If it exceeds 1.2%, that tells us there's too much excess cash being thrown off. If it does exceed 1.2, cash flow must not exceed 12% of operating expenses. There are certain exceptions to this 1.1 to 1.2 parameter, as well as to the 12% of operating expenses. That would be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, but really when you're completing your application, you want to look for your first year debt service coverage ratio being between 1.1 and 1.2. And if it exceeds 1.2, make sure that your cash flow does not exceed 12% of operating expenses in that first year. Secondly, we want to make sure that you're demonstrating positive cash flow for 20 years. Most HCD state programs require only a 15-year positive cash flow, but home looks out for 20 years. So make sure that you've got positive cash flow through year 20. I am seeing somebody want to take a look at the Q&A for questions on this before I move on to NEPA.
I'm happy to read
I
them.
can do that.
Oh, go ahead.
I can do that. Okay, let's see. Darcy asks, are there new questions in eCivis? Once we fill out the application form, are we done with content, or is there new content in the eCivis portal also? And I think that is a question for Joe, if he's still with us, or JT or Chris. Could you answer how the portal is set up this time?
Hi, this is Chris. It should be fairly similar to our last NOFA. So if you submitted an application in our last NOFA, last eCivis portal, it should be fairly similar.
Thank you, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
And the next question is from Eduardo. Is there a part 1 and part 2 of the portal? In prior portals, you had to hit the submit button to move into part 2. If there is, can you still move between both parts? Looking to you again, Chris.
There is a part 1 and a part 2, and you can move in between both parts. Yes. So it's similar to last eCivis round, last NOFA round.
Thank you, Chris. Another question, can home-funded projects accept tenant-based vouchers during the life of the project? I can field this question. Yes, the home-funded projects can accept tenant-based vouchers because they come with the tenant, but they cannot be used in the underwriting. Only project-based vouchers that are committed to the project can be used to underwrite the cash flow. But if they get a potential tenant that has a tenant-based voucher, they can reside in a home-funded project.
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you, Chris. So moving on through project feasibility, the next section I'm going to cover is NEPA. So next slide, please. Thank you, Jay. Okay, we talked a little bit about NEPA earlier, but it's such an important component of feasibility that we want to talk a little bit more about it again now. Another very important component of project feasibility is, as I mentioned, the phase 1 NEPA environmental review. We did discuss NEPA earlier in the threshold section of the presentation, but some points are worth emphasizing here. Please be very cautious about taking any action that can be considered choice limiting. Choice limiting actions are addressed specifically and clearly in 24 CFR section 5822, which states in short, upon contemplation of federal funds, which is defined very specifically as upon application. So the minute you hit that submit button, there is a prohibition against any activity which would have an adverse effect on the environment or limit the choices of reasonable alternatives. So once you have hit that submit button, all potential choice limiting actions must cease. Next slide, please. So what does that mean? Well, from the date of application until the date the authority to use grant funds or AUGF is issued, all activity involving the project and the site must stop. And that could pertain to buyer activity as well as seller activity. So this limitation applies to a very broad range of activities that I mentioned include both buyer and seller, not just the land itself. One good example of this might be if you have a purchase agreement and that purchase agreement expires after you've submitted your application and you did not get an extension on that purchase agreement before submitting your application. If you do so after submitting your application, that is considered a choice limiting action. So we strongly advise before taking any activity whatsoever in regards to the project after you've hit submit, please consult with your home representative before doing that to make sure you're not committing a choice limiting action that will negate your application. We don't want that to happen. Next slide, please. As if we haven't given you enough warnings, I think we mentioned earlier that, the NEPA process is a very lengthy one. So you want to make sure to allow sufficient time to complete that review process, especially if mitigation is required, which may prolong the process even further. And as a reminder, the cost of which must be included in your development budget. And again, a reminder again that actions taken by either seller or buyer can trigger a choice limiting action. And please also bear in mind that separate environmental clearance, i.e. individual AUGFs, are required for other funding sources as well. So you may have an AUGF for one federal funding source. You cannot use that for home. You have to have one specific to home as well as vice versa. The only other warning comment really I want to make here before I'm moving on to relocation is that please make sure that you become very familiar with the section in the NOFA that talks about the relationship between AUGF and site control. And please also refer to that CPD notice that Nikki referenced earlier that pertains specifically to the relationship between AUGF and site control. Some forms of site control do not require a conditional out for failure to receive an AUGF, but other forms of site control require conditional language in them whereby you can exit the contract agreement if you don't get your AUGF. This was an issue on our last NOFA where certain forms of site control that do require that conditional language didn't have it. So please make sure that you become very familiar with what forms of site control require that conditional language and which forms don't. Next slide, please. We're going to wrap up with just a few more comments about relocation. Next slide, please. Please make sure that you become very familiar with the Uniform Relocation Act and Section 104D of the HCD Act of 1974, again designed to prevent displacement of individuals or business concerns without adequate notice and compensation. If relocation is necessary, as Chris said earlier during the scoring section, you must establish and document in your application a date of initiation of negotiation, or ION, and please again make sure to include any costs of relocation in your development budget. Next slide. And again, to reiterate some of what Chris had mentioned, if relocation is triggered, specifically, you must include with the application a copy of the GIN, the General Information Notice, that you would have provided to all occupants at or prior to application, a complete tenant notification list of everyone who received that notification, along with proof of delivery of all of those notices, and a complete relocation plan that was produced no later than 6 months prior to your application date. All 4 of these items must be provided to receive full points. If relocation is not applicable, your application must clearly document why it's not applicable. And finally, to wrap up, there are other additional overlays because we are a federal program of which you must also be aware in your application process, including but not limited to the following: labor standards such as Davis-Bacon, which applies to projects with 12 or more home units, as well as Section 3. There are procurement standards pertaining to the RFQ and RFP process specific to selecting an admin subcontractor if you are using one on your project. Various EEOC regulations pertaining to such things as affirmative marketing, affirmative fair housing, the active solicitation of what we call MEBE-WEBE subcontractors, which is minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses, the Violence Against Women's Act, or VAWA, the Build America, Buy America, or BABA. We already talked about single audit reports for state recipients only, etc. So yes, there's a lot of regulations to be aware of as you go through completing your application process. But again, as you go through that process, feel free to use the home NOFA at hcd.ca.gov mailbox to direct your questions to us. And if necessary, we can schedule one-on-one technical assistance. At this point, looks like there's one more question in the inbox that Nikki can address, and then she will wrap up as well.
Okay, thank you, Francesca. The final question that's in our docs is, will awards be loans or will any of the home funds be grants? So in response for a multifamily, I'm gonna say this in context of what the material we've been discussing. Multifamily rental projects, rental rehab projects, first-time home buyer projects, all the funding when it reaches the beneficiary, which is either a new homeowner in a first-time home buyer project, a developer that's developing multifamily housing and needs to cover its construction costs, or a state recipient that is funding a developer for their construction costs, will all be grants, will all be loans. We do not provide grant funding because it is not allowed in our state regulations. And so all assistance must be provided in the form of a grant. There's different rules for different in the form of a loan. There's different rules for the types of loans and the terms of loans, but they must be loans. In program activities, there's a little bit more leeway, but we're not talking about program activities in this particular session. And with that, I just would like to thank everybody for spending the afternoon with the home program project team. It's been a pleasure to serve you these many, many years. And we look forward to getting your applications. We know that it'll be a very, very competitive round. We recognize this, and we hope that eventually that the allocations will grow again. But for the time being, they are what they are. And if we can help build a successful project in any type of meaningful way, we look forward to our engagement with you. Just want to remind you that technical assistance is available. All you have to do is reach out to the Home NOFA email inbox at Home NOFA, all one word, at hcd.ca.gov, and we will schedule a Teams session with you so that we can get onto Teams and work face to face and share our screens and talk about the ideas that you have to help you submit a good application. And with that, I'm going to, and if there's any, this is just another slide at the back of the deck to remind you to use that Home NOFA email inbox. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the host, and thank you very much for spending your day with us.
Thanks, Nikki. That's me. And thank you, everybody. We knew it would take pretty much the whole 3 hours. So thank you for your patience. And we hope that we can receive plenty of apps and that you're not shy about approaching us through primarily our Home NOFA inbox so that we can just help you all we can along the way and help you put together the best possible application. So thank you for your interest in the program, and we look forward to doing business with you. Have a great rest of the day.